episode of Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. It is the show that brings you the very best guests in true crime on trending criminal cases. And this one, perhaps the biggest criminal case in the entire country and maybe around the world, set to begin the trial of Bryan Kohberger, accused of killing the so-called Idaho Four. They are, of course, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, a triplet, so making it even worse than imaginable. They were murdered in their Moscow, Idaho apartment back in 2022. The sole suspect, the person who will face trial, at least as of right now, is Bryan Kohberger, originally from Pennsylvania. He was a graduate student at Washington State University. Let me welcome in the best guest. You've got the go-to man for this story, the Idaho Statesman reporter, the Idaho three-time Reporter of the Year, Kevin Fixler. We've got Sky Lazaro, a formidable criminal defense attorney out of the great state of Utah, perhaps best known to us, but not the people who really know her, but to us for defending Corey Richins for a time, who I understand is now back on track for a trial. And last but not least, he is the host of Courtroom Confidential. He is the former LA Prosecutor of the Year and a current criminal defense attorney, and my friend, as are Kevin and Sky. So we've got some breaking news here. Kevin Fixler, he's all over this. Jody Arrington says it right here. Kevin Fixler is awesome. And not only is he joining the show, but he is joining with breaking news. So Kevin, I know this is dropping momentarily. Everyone should be subscribing to the Idaho Statesman. It is the paper of record for this story. And you can follow Kevin's reporting there. What's going on, Kev?
Right. So this afternoon, there was an update to the public case summary, which I think many people who follow this case closely pay attention to beyond just the Idaho Cases of Interest page, where frequently the Bryan Kohberger case gets clicked through, I'm certain. But that's where people can access the case filings once they get publicly posted. And today we can see that it appears more than likely that the defense has filed for a special investigation following up on the invite by Judge Stephen Hippler to do so. And that relates to the alleged violations of the gag order based on perceived and likely leaks given to NBC related to the case and the Kohberger investigation. Yeah.
Very interesting. So, Josh, to you, I was on your show last night. We were talking about this a little bit. You know, you are the former LA Prosecutor of the Year. What does this mean now? And Fix just dropped off. I'm sure he'll be back. What does it mean? I guess that they're officially filing the defenses for a special prosecutor. Does this mean that there's all new players that they want involved on the government side trying the case, or is this just as it relates specifically to what happened with the Dateline episode and the gag order?
I think it's the latter. I think it's just dealing with the Dateline episode. The judge had at the when that story broke, the Dateline episode broke, the next hearing, the judge kind of lost it. He was controlled fury about the leak having taken place, and he had invited the prosecutor's office to have a special prosecutor assigned, meaning basically someone to investigate them and how did this leak take place. And apparently now the defense is trying to play off of that. I can't think of a better term for it, but they're saying, well, we're actually going to move the court to make an order for that. I think it's what they're doing here. I also think the timing of it is interesting because they're supposed to be back in court next Wednesday to talk about a motion to continue based almost entirely on the idea that there has been this leak and there should now be an investigation into the leak. So I think that this might play a role in all of that, saying, hey, we just requested that you make assign a special prosecutor. That hasn't even been done. The investigation hasn't even been started or finished, and therefore we need more time. In my view, that's what this is all a setup for.
Shout out to Arizona Gal. If you don't know this, the COE, who is the chief of everything, and I met working in Tucson. I was a reporter, and she was at K-Gun 9, and Josh Ritter sent her over. So thank you to Josh for that. Sky Lazar, and then I'm going to swing back to Kevin on this. But just to sort of flesh this out a little bit. So Kevin Fixler comes on the show and is kind enough to break news that is dropping right now. And the COE will put the link into the for the Idaho Statesman. But this special prosecutor. So, we hear this term every so often. What does it mean for the case overall? How does it impact the case? Does this mean there's more likely to be a continuance? It does not impact that part of it. How do you see it?
I think it can go either way. I agree with Josh that that's probably what the defense is trying to do. They approached the court, a couple days ago asking for a continuance to continue to flesh some things out and deal with, potential juror issues. And the court invited essentially go ahead and file, and we can get an investigation going. I think it's the best basis they have to ask for a continuance right now, and probably the only chance they have of getting one, depending on how long this investigation is going to take and whether or not it's enough to sway the court, one way or another on a continuance. I don't think it changes the position the court's taken on seating a jury, but depending on where that leak came from, that it could give the defense additional motions to file. If that came directly from prosecutors in the case and there's been a violation of the gag order, I could foresee maybe some new motions coming, maybe trying to recuse that office or that attorney, which would then impact whether or not the trial is going to go forward.
So Kevin, with this, tell us a little bit. Judge Hippler is obviously a no nonsense type of judge, and it appears he's been on the bench for quite some time. He was very upset about the Dateline episode. Is this a situation you think where Ann Taylor is kind of jumping on his frustration and now filing this motion thinking, okay, I've got a pretty good shot because the judge ain't happy either?
Are you referencing, just to clarify, the continuance or the motion for the special prosecutor?
The latter. Sort of both, but more specifically the latter, what you came on here with.
Well, when I sat in the courtroom on, I believe it was May 15th, it was pretty clear that Judge Hippler was looking directly at the defense table when he noted that at the closed door morning hearing before the public portion that he would entertain a special prosecutor appointment. And I believe that's because, and he spoke about, that this likely came from the prosecution side. To remind people, the gag order restricts attorneys from both sides from speaking publicly about the case outside of court and outside of filings and motions. That includes all law enforcement who have been involved in this case on behalf of the state. So the prosecution has to look out for those people. As part of what Hippler then required and ordered, both sides, the defense and the prosecution, to retain all records and correspondence that they've had with anybody in the case. Both have submitted that they met that 7-day deadline. And, I guess what I would say is I was a bit surprised, actually, that the defense waited to file for this. And in fact, they sought the other pathway, which was the continuance. And that leads to us, the public portion next Wednesday, in addition to a closed portion about whether or not they have provided enough evidence to argue that it was an alternate perpetrator rather than Bryan Kohberger.
Yeah. So Kevin, let's just start digging in. So there is a hearing set for June 18th. What should we expect, or what are you expecting from that hearing coming up?
Yeah. So to reiterate, there are two portions. The first portion is public, meaning the media can be there and anybody who chooses to be there. And we'll be able to watch that through the court's live stream for those who were paying attention and have accessed that before. But that is where the discussion about the defense's push for a continuance will be argued orally between the defense trying to justify it and the objection of the state. They filed earlier this week their objection saying no, it is time to have this trial. The homicides occurred November of 22. Bryan Kohberger was arrested in late December 22. He was arraigned in May of 23. We had a change of venue in September of 24. It is time is exactly how they wrote it. And then the second portion of that hearing will be closed door, private, between the attorneys and the judge only. And that is a discussion about whether or not the defense has met the evidence threshold for arguing before a jury that it was not Bryan Kohberger, but actually X person. And they do have to name that person in Idaho law and criminal rules. They can't just say, hey, it was somebody else. I mean, they can, but they won't have as strong an argument. They have to say it was this person, and here is the evidence as proof.
And Fix, I'm obviously not going to ask you to name a name if you know the name, but do you have an idea of who the defense, any idea of who the defense is going to claim as this quote unquote alternate suspect?
I do not. Nobody does. It's all been filed under seal to this point, which makes sense. And, I think we can think about some of the people who were floated earlier through online sleuthing and things like that. But what we do know is Ann Taylor said that the defense came across this tip that was submitted to police that they then investigated, and now they feel like they have enough evidence and have submitted that. The state, as you would imagine, has objected. But again, that is under seal. We have no idea what arguments are being made, and we won't be privy to the hearing itself, that portion of it anyway.
Yeah. So CJ took my question, which is great, CJ. Any chance this, Sky, to you, everyone, including the judge, you heard Kevin say the judge was looking at the defense as a way to say, hey, you can, file for a special prosecutor here. But how do we know it wasn't the defense that leaked this information? Ann Taylor is a bit of a pit bull, and she's a dogged attorney. How are we so sure it came from the government side and not the defense side, Sky?
Well, I think if the defense is filing and asking for a special investigation, they're probably fairly certain it didn't come from theirs. Or at least they're hopeful that it's not. It seemed to me, my takeaway just from watching what happened and the type of information that was leaked, that it is probably more likely it came from the prosecution side. Maybe not. But and maybe that's why the defense waited to file this. Maybe they, felt they needed to do some due diligence before they teed off and to make sure that they were right. Or at least had some good standing, because the last thing you want to do is invite an investigation into your side of things, and end up being the bad guy sitting there. I think that would be publicly probably just as harmful to Kohberger. But I think the nature of the type of information that was released, I don't think that that's information we'd see coming from the defense side.
Which is a good point, which Josh Ritter, that's all the more reason I think maybe it is a defense. It's like a double bluff, but like we did it, and now we're filing this motion for a special prosecutor to just make everyone think it wasn't them. I don't know. But Josh, if you pull back the proverbial curtain here, you are a prosecutor in the LA County's office, and you can tell us now that you're not there anymore. Are there moments when you would want to leak information to the media to help strengthen your case? I assume that happens. How does that happen?
Oh, I'm sure leaks happen. There was never moments when I felt like doing it, mainly because they put the fear of God into you when you're in the DA's office about speaking to the media at all, let alone, going about leaking something. I also don't see how this really advantages the prosecution. I guess you could make the argument, well, they're getting all this information in front of the public and they're affecting the jury pool, and people are going to already believe that this man is guilty before they get into court. I suppose so, but there's been so much media coverage on this anyways. The problem, in my view, is calling it the prosecution side or the defense side even sticking with just the prosecution, you're talking about many different people. We're not just talking about like the lawyers in court. We're talking about everyone who's might have had hands on this information, who includes support staff. It includes the investigators. You're talking about investigators from 2 different departments. You're talking, more than that, because you also had federal investigators involved. And then you've got all of their support staff. And then you've got all of the kind of technical people too. One of the things that was kind of the big surprise moment in this Dateline episode was that they had that surveillance footage from outside of the home that we had seen a still from before, but we'd never seen the actual full footage of it. And so that's one of the things that we can kind of corroborate as being, genuine information. Well, those surveillance cameras, these are not just kind of plug and play applications. You have to, and I know this from my time in the DA's office and as a defense attorney, that when you get these surveillance files, they're all proprietary, and you have to go back to the company and say, can you please give us the software so we can open this up so that we can see what this video is? So now you're talking about all of those people. You're talking about the people, that you had to speak with to give the file to open it up, to realize what it was. So I'm just saying that, like, we don't know, first of all, if it was one source that Dateline had or several sources. And when you start to brainstorm who could have had their hands on this information, it is a lot of people. And if they expect to find out who that is before trial begins, I kind of feel like good luck.
Yeah. And that's a great point. These are the victims. Obviously, we've got Ethan, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Xana Kernodle. And Ethan and Xana were an item, of course. And you always see pictures of Bryan. I like to put these up first, but this is Bryan and Ann Taylor here. Fix, I was on Josh's show last night, and we were talking sort of the media angle. The question here from Marco is, why wouldn't the state have put a stop to that Dateline thing? The main reason, Marco, is they really can't. Dateline is an independent media entity, and they were running with this story. My question for you, Fix, is, I guess, do you care to share your thoughts on that particular episode? I told Josh my feelings on it are, it's a First Amendment right. This is what journalists do. They got some really amazing information, but I told Ritter at the same time, I don't know how comfortable I would be as a reporter if I had that information running with it, simply knowing that this could happen. Now the families could be derailed, the victims' families, and this could just drag on longer. Curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll be a little careful, but to Josh's point, we don't know how many sources Dateline had. We don't know how robust their requirements are for reporting this kind of information. I happen to know a little bit the producer behind that episode, and believe he and the crew would have followed due diligence. That said, I can't speak to that at all. I think it's also important to note, because these are not verified sources, they're not public, they're not identified beyond individuals close to the investigation. I think it's pretty clear that is authentic video from the neighbor's home, as Josh also mentioned. And I can say that because we've seen screen grabs of that same video in court filings, official court filings. So it's pretty clear that's authentic. Do we make assumptions about the rest of the information being true based on that? We really cannot. But the things, just to remind people, it was data from Kohberger's cell phone, including various images and selfies. And, I'm trying to even remind myself all the other things, they alleged, and I want to really underscore that when I make this point, that he had been searching for information about Ted Bundy. On its own, that seems incriminating. But we do also have to remind ourselves that Bryan Kohberger was a PhD student in criminology, and he had studied under a professor, a renowned criminologist at DeSales University, who had studied and written about Ted Bundy. So individually, it seems, based in the context of this case, fairly incriminating. And that's how the defense will say this is prejudicial. But I'm sure if that is accurate information and the state intends to prove that information at trial and offer it as evidence, the defense will probably have some pretty good arguments and explanations. So to get back to your main question, is this something that other media outlets would run with? And the answer is yes, but it would go under intense scrutiny. I can tell you at the Idaho Statesman, we would need 2, if not 3 sources, including to be able to use someone anonymously. But yes, the gag order does not apply to media. I'm not sure what the state could have done in terms of an injunction to prevent an episode of a nationally broadcast television episode on Dateline. Probably not, because of the First Amendment rights. But yes, other media would have run with this if they had access to the same sources, if they're credible.
Yeah. And I was saying on Josh's show last night, the buck sort of stops with ratings, and they are looking at their bottom line. And if they know that there's going to be a huge ratings hit, which it was, they're going to do their due diligence, and there's, guidelines that they've got to follow. But I'm sure, and I happen to know the producer as well, and he's a great guy, and he's on the up and up, and Dateline's been around for 30 plus years. So I'm sure they went through the proper channels. You can't really blame them. I mean, you can be upset with them, I guess, to say, hey, now you may screw up the process for the victims' families, but, they're doing their job. So there you go with that. Josh, and I'll go back to Sky after this. Has the state, Josh, likely started and possibly even concluded an investigation of the defense's alternative suspect theory? So you heard Kevin say at this hearing on June 18th, they're going to have a closed-door meeting about this potential alternative suspect. And you heard Kevin say in Idaho, you've got to actually provide a name. Is this something that the state would already know somehow in advance, and something that they would have to look at with their own investigators?
I'm almost positive it's something that the state already knows in advance. Even though this is going to be a closed door hearing, I think that's more to protect the information and the person that they are potentially pointing the finger at, so as not to expose them to the public if the judge decides to not allow this information in. And but I imagine that this is all information that the prosecution is well aware of, and I'm sure that the whatever filings have been made as a part of this have already been shared with the prosecution. On that front, we've kind of heard from the prosecution before now, indicating that they're kind of pressing the defense to hand this stuff over, in my view, because they feel like the defense really doesn't have the goods. I think they know that the defense is just going to try to do this scattershot approach of, well, it could have been any number of people, and the police received all sorts of tips, and weren't you incredibly myopic in your investigation, and didn't you just find zero in on our client and ignore all other suspects or all other information, rather than a legitimate, what is described in Idaho as a alternate perpetrator, which is, they have case law and criminal code specifically on this, what that means and what needs to be proven in order for that to be allowed in. And by the way, it includes not allowing things like, even though you may have feel like someone else could have been involved, that doesn't really necessarily qualify if it doesn't exculpate the defendant. In other words, we've heard a lot of information about, potential other DNA on the banister or on a glove that was found outside. But if that doesn't show that other person, unidentified person, is the actual killer and not Bryan Kohberger, then this doesn't qualify as alternate suspect. It has to be someone that you can say this person did it to the exclusion of the defendant, and therefore is allowable, and therefore I should be able to argue to the jury why this is wrong, that the investigators ignored that person.
That's interesting. I did not know that. But what I do know is Fix not only broke news, but he even sent me a question for Sky, which I appreciate. So this is actually from Kev. I don't want to take credit for this, but Kevin let me know that the defense just this past week filed for an independent analysis of evidence. What's going on here, Sky? So it sounds like they don't trust the government investigators, local PD, the FBI, whoever it might be. And, obviously this might have to do with the knife sheath, with DNA or other evidence. What do you think is happening here?
I think that happens in a lot of cases. The state's supposed to preserve evidence or samples of whatever's taken. And if there isn't enough to preserve, then there has to be like a notice of consumption that's filed that the defense can object to, because the defense always has the opportunity in cases to independently test whatever it is, DNA, other forensics, things of that nature. It is a little bit late in the case, I would think, to start thinking about getting independent testing done, unless something came to light that made you question it. But I'm not surprised that they're wanting to do it in a case like this. I think you have to, as the defense. It's a death penalty case, so you have to do everything. You probably need to get independent testing of everything to verify it. Just because they need to do their due diligence in this case as well. But if this isn't new evidence, I do think it is a little late when you're talking about a trial that's, set to start the end of July, I think, right?
Mm.
Not that you can't get it done that quickly, depending on where you send it, but
yeah. Yeah, and jury selection, by the way, is slated for July 31st, and first day openings are set for August 11th. And I know Josh and I are planning to be out there, and of course, Kevin Fixler will be there. Maybe Sky will come out to hang out.
Sky.
Not that far away. I'll come hang out with you guys.
Come riding in on your horse, Sky. That would be an amazing entrance. So Ann Taylor in her filing says, and I quote here, "The leaked materials appear carefully curated to promote a narrative of guilt." So that was what Ann Taylor says. But then you heard Kevin say that the government had a filing of its own. I think it was this past week, a 22-page filing, and they basically rejected any further delays. Their direct quote in their filing is, "It is time to try this case. The defendant was arrested in late December of 2022 and was indicted in May of 2023. And Kevin, I mean, there was also a change of venue. Is there a sense of restlessness, I guess, in the court of public opinion? I know you're chasing down leads with the prosecutor's office and the defense attorneys, but do you get a chance to speak to people in the community? Are they getting antsy or frustrated?
I have not spoken to members of the public, no man on the street, so to speak, with relation to that issue. But I think certainly many are planning, not only just members of the media and starred podcasters such as yourself and Josh, but I do think certainly the families, and we can see that the Gonsalves family, who has been vocal throughout this process and frustrated by delays and venue change, given they live 7 hours north. They have a family Facebook page and have posted that they can't even contemplate that this would be delayed even further. So I think many follow the Gonsalves family because they've kind of developed a platform. And while they don't speak on behalf of all four of the families, I think many in the public who are following this case do watch them closely because they've made themselves most available. And I think the sentiment that this continues and continues and continues is, one that many probably sympathize with them about.
Yeah, and by the way, I had a mini heart attack. I saw in the chat, and I did not know this. And Kevin, you might, that it looks like Amazon is going to have a documentary coming out in July, and apparently the families are all interviewed. Have you heard anything about this?
That's the documentary that's connected to the James Patterson book that is, I believe, coming out. Is that July 14th?
Okay.
In anticipation of the trial. So if this were to be delayed, I mean, that book is tied to the opening. But what I will tell you, and you've had both of these prior authors on, Jay Rubin and Howard Bloom, two books have come out about this case already. And I know there's some independently published books as well. But in terms of, professionally or, your traditional publishers, 2 books have come out, and each of those was tied to what was then expected to be the trial date. Here's the third one. So I don't know if it's an omen. And because they have announced a published date, perhaps the trial may get kicked again. But I know there's a companion documentary that will publish or will air, but I don't know the date on that. So somebody's got to scoop on me there.
Yeah, I did not know that. So James Patterson with another book. I wonder why Ann Taylor took another death penalty case. Fix, I don't think a lot of people know this, and I just found this out recently that she's actually handling another death penalty case concurrently with this. I mean, how's that even possible, Fix?
Judge Hippler, yeah, he kind of went after her a little bit in April when she started to note that the defense may not have enough time to prepare for the scheduled trial date. And he kind of said, you're telling me this, and yet you didn't file for more resources, more paralegals. And didn't you also sign up for another death penalty eligible case? To which she said, the pacing of this case at that point suggested that I could handle it. So that case is actually not slated for trial itself until 2026. And just briefly, that case is connected to a prisoner who actually was able to spearhead an escape. He feigned a medical event and was taken to the hospital in the middle of the night in Boise, and then had a friend he was able to contact through a contraband cell phone, and they ambushed the prison officials. All three of them ended up shot, and they escaped for 2 days, and now both are charged with murder in 2 different counties up north. They were recaptured. Yeah, it was a pretty intense case it was in March of 24.
Wow, that's kind of crazy.
I would say this too, just being a former public defender. I spent 4 years at the public defender's office here in Salt Lake early on. You don't always necessarily get a choice. There's only so many death penalty qualified attorneys a lot of times. And Idaho is not a big state well, they've had a lot of death penalty cases lately. But in terms of population and things like that. And so I'm not, in defense of Anne, I know the judge kind of went after her, but it's not uncommon, or at least it wasn't uncommon in our office here, for attorney to have more than one death penalty case at a time, so long as, obviously you're not trying 2 cases at the same time or close to, but you may get one as one of them's headed to trial. So I'm not shocked by her having more than one.
Yeah, Sky, how many, I'm just curious, I don't know if you can even tell me, but how many cases do you kind of juggle at a time? How many defense cases?
A lot.
Yeah.
Not as many as the public defenders. Not that they all have all death penalty cases, but I would say our public defender's office is juggling a lot of cases. I probably have 60 plus.
Wow.
And some are small, and not that every case is important to whoever it is, but they're not all murder cases. There's just kind of little stuff that comes up here and there that doesn't take a lot of time or resources that you deal with along the way.
Change of venue was granted because they moved from Moscow to Boise. That's wild. I mean, Josh, when you were at the prosecutor's office in LA, how many cases would you be working on at a given time? 570?
No. God, that's a good question. Maybe like a dozen to 20, but in varying degrees of readiness. Some of them are just filed. Some of them may be close to trial. But yeah, when you were had a very heavy caseload, I could see you kind of juggling about that many. But I will say, I think the PD's office even had more. I mean, they were very inundated with the amount of clients that they had to handle.
And Josh, let me come back to you here. So, the judge warned the defendant's motion, it says here, amounts to a request. This is the judge, I think, answering the request for which one was this? This was Bill Thompson. I'm sorry. The 22-page filing. He says that the defendant's motion amounts to a request for a perpetual continuance so that his counsel can go down every rabbit hole until defendant, rather than a court, deems himself ready for trial. So this is basically Bill Thompson blasting the defense, saying they're looking for a perpetual continuance. So my question, Josh, is when is enough enough? When is it go time? Because that is what Bill Thompson is saying it is right now.
I think it's go time now. I mean, it really has been a long period of time, and I understand it's a complex case, and I understand it's a death penalty case, and all of that. But really, when you look at the circumstances of this case, we're talking about one incident that occurred on one evening, and I realize it was a tremendous amount loss of life on that evening. But just because there were multiple murders that took place on one evening doesn't exponentially increase the complexity of it to the point that you cannot get the case ready to go. So yes, it's a very serious case, and yes, it's a very important case. But as far as the complexity of the case, it's not so much that you would think they can't be ready to go after how many years are we out now? I mean, we're closing in on 3 years this year. So I think that that's plenty of time. I don't begrudge the defense. Like, I get it. They're kind of in this position where they want to explore every avenue, and time is certainly on their side to delay as much as possible. But I do think the judge and the prosecutor are probably right that it is time. And I will say that this recent leak, I don't think that gives them much of an argument to ask for more time. I think it's a headache, and I think it will cause issues in jury selection. And I think it's certainly something they're going to have to voir dire about. What did people learn from that? How many people watched it? Did that influence them? But as far as delaying, it doesn't really make sense to me. It's not going to, what are we going to delay so people forget about the Dateline episode? I mean, the more time doesn't seem to resolve the problem that was potentially created by Dateline, except for one huge exception. And that is if the defense says, Your Honor, we need to know the source of the leak before we begin, because if that source was on the investigative team, if that was a detective who's going to testify in this trial,
Wow.
We need to know that before they take the stand. And that, to me, is probably their strongest argument and could be the biggest problem created by this Dateline leak.
Yeah, and Josh, I mean, I was asking you about sort of the inside baseball of this yesterday, and you were saying that they're literally going to say, everyone who's involved with this, hand over your cell phone, whatever. I mean, is that what's going to happen now?
Oh, I think so, especially if you get a special prosecutor. If a special prosecutor gets involved, they're going to treat it like they would any other crime, and they're going to go, I want the names of every single person who had access to that information. I want all, emails, text messages made on their certainly on their government provided phones and email accounts. I want to know who these people were in contact with. And they're probably going to take the time to then sit down with and interview every one of those people that they feel could have been the potential leak. We're talking months to get that investigation finished. I don't think this is a matter of throwing 6 people into a conference room and saying, all right, come clean. It's going to take a long time. And if the defense makes a strong enough point to the judge that they need to know who that is before they can begin trial, I don't know. I could see that being the one thing the judge might go for. And I hope not, but I could see that being it.
Yeah. And Fix, I'm purposely leaving you out for the moment because I don't put you in a weird spot to answer this question.
I actually have a question of Josh, though. I mean, I think
Yes.
He's raised a really interesting point. And I'm also wondering at the same time, can that be resolved if the defense is permitted to ask each investigator who testifies, opening question, did you leak any information during the course of the case? At least at that point, they would have...
You're right. And then what about the guy who goes, I'd like to speak to an attorney before I answer that question?
the Mark Furman moment, right?
Yeah, right.
That's under don't ask questions you don't know the answer to.
Scott, I was going to ask you, I mean, if you had to guess, what was the motive to leak here? Was it a financial motive? Did Dateline say, here's $500,000, give us this video? I mean, Dateline, I believe, I might be wrong, but I think that I think they might be able to pay for stuff, whereas NBC News, which, hard news, there's no way they'd be able to pay. I'm not 1,000% sure. I'd have to fix. Do you happen to know? Can Dateline pay for things?
Go
Go ahead. Scott, go ahead.
No, Kevin, do you know?
I don't, but I happen to know a local anchor here, and they're affiliated with NBC, and she tells me that Dateline does not pay and has historically been known not to.
Okay. So, I mean, I hope that they don't, but maybe they're allowed to, and I really don't know the answer, so forgive me. But what do you think the motive here was to leak this information, Sky?
I think it depends on who it was. I mean, really, like Josh brought up, there's so many people along the line that could have had access to this that maybe wasn't an investigator, maybe wasn't probably was not an attorney. But when you start talking about support staff, people who work in, just work in the police department, as clerks or administrators or records clerks or whatever it is, who knows? I don't necessarily think this helps, that it puts out any worse information than it was already out there, right? It's already colored against Mr. Kohberger. I don't think this, makes it so much worse than anything else that we've heard. So I don't know. I don't see the motive as trying to sway the jury. So it's hard to say. Mm-hmm. It's my experience that Dateline doesn't pay for information either. Not to say, they didn't. So if it's not financial, is it just somebody who, wanted, to get involved somehow? It's interesting when you get into cases like this where there's a lot of press, the people who kind of come out of the woodwork that on any other case wouldn't care what happens, but somehow want to be involved in something. So this is their way to do it.
By the way, the big morning shows like Today and Good Morning America, they have ways, because I've seen it in action, where they might not pay you like a monetary amount, but they'll fly you into New York, they'll put you up at the plaza, they'll take you to dinner, and that's what they do. And I've seen it in action. Josh Ritter, is there a chance here that if they can find the source of the leak, that this, or even if not, I guess, is there a chance that this evidence could get excluded? And let me just, before you answer that, here are some of the things that were revealed on this May 9th episode. He searched, allegedly, Kohberger did, for Ted Bundy. He had some porn searches using the word drugged, sleeping, passed out. His cell phone pinned a tower near the victims' homes 23 times in the 4 months before the murders. They've got video of him, I think, driving around in circles a whole bunch of times and then peeling out from the scene. So, Josh, is there a chance that Judge Hippler says, okay, all this stuff is suppressed? I mean, they're going to file a motion in limine, I assume. Is there a chance? Because this really kills the government's case.
I really don't think there's a chance that it gets suppressed, but there's definitely a chance that if they figure out who the leak is and that person was somehow tied to the recovery of some of this evidence, that becomes fertile ground for the defense to cross-examine on, and that issue may become something that the jury learns about, which is not a small point in a case like this. The defense, I think it's fair to say, is kind of on the ropes searching for some sort of plausible defense. I mean, they've tried to get that DNA kicked out. That was the cornerstone of this entire case. They've done everything that they can legally to get it kicked out. They're not going to get it kicked out. Now they're going to turn to some sort of innocent explanation for it. And we've already heard whisperings that that's going to be, oh, it was planted. Well, wouldn't that play nicely into their theory of an overly aggressive investigation if they can show that an investigator was the one who leaked this information? And isn't that same corrupt, biased investigator's office are the same ones who recovered the knife sheath? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is all a setup, and blah, 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 blah. You could see how it could create a lot of other problems, even if it's not flat out suppression. I I don't think the judge would suppress it, because we're not talking about some sort of violation of a Fourth Amendment right here that would allow for that remedy. But we are talking about a complete mess if it does come out that it's someone who is tied to the investigation. My hope is that it's some low-level data entry person or something like that, some support staff person that just got a wild hair and said, I'm going to, hand this over to Dateline. Won't that be fun? And that it will be ugly, but not affect the actual case.
Yeah. And there have been reports, and I don't want to stir the rumor mill, but, maybe it was the FBI. Who knows? We just don't know. And that's why they're going to maybe assign a special prosecutor and investigate this. What exactly was leaked? We just went through some of it. Searches for Ted Bundy, the porn searches, the phone pinging. They also had what I thought were pretty interesting interviews with people who had crossed paths with Bryan Kohberger. What about taking the death penalty off the table? Fix, is that something that you've heard? Is that a possible remedy? I know you're not an attorney, but any word on the street about the possible removal of the death penalty, which I don't think is going to happen?
I think we've seen that the defense, their primary focus thus far during pretrial and the motion practice is to kick the death penalty. So I think if there's any avenue, I think they will explore it.
Josh, this one is from Flora Paris, and you've got to say it that way. Josh, what is the difference between a robust defense and a never-ending search for a way to get him off? That's a good question. It seems to be a fine line.
Yeah, it just depends on how fancy you want to sound saying it, but I think it's basically the same thing. I mean, this defense, one thing I think you got to give them credit for is they do seem to be limitless in their energy. They have really pursued every possible angle, left no stone unturned, whether that's in trying to delay, whether that's in trying to get the death penalty removed, whether that's in trying to get, even down to the words that witnesses use in court. We don't want them saying bushy eyebrows. I mean, they've just really been incredibly thorough. And I know that a lot of people watching and listening have been annoyed by that. But, these defense attorneys, I think, legitimately feel like they are trying to save their client's life. And if that's your pursuit, if that's the way you feel about it, you could understand their kind of endless enthusiasm to find every angle to defend him.
This is, to me, a fascinating conversation. I hope people are enjoying it. If you are, please hit the like button, subscribe. We've got a Patreon page. CH here. Sky, Josh mentioned this. What are your thoughts? Would a low-level data entry person have access to some of this evidence? I mean, you guys do, but we don't know the inner workings, kind of behind the curtain. So, is there an hourly employee at the prosecutor's office who is looking through really privileged information who could say, hey, I'm getting paid $14 an hour. Maybe I could get my salary bumped up if I give this to somebody?
Unfortunately, it's a very good possibility. Should things in cases like this be walled off or have controlled access to? Yes. I know it's our practice and our firm that if we have cases where there's protective orders or gag orders, that only attorneys and people, authorized individuals, be able to access any of the information in the case. But the reality is there's a good possibility that maybe the DA's office hasn't done that, or the police department hasn't done that. I in cases all the time ask for, in discovery, anybody who's ever accessed that file. And it's surprising to me what I get back. I mean, it's people who answer the phone, who have nothing to do with the case, but work for the department, that have the ability to look at least limited things up on the computer, and who have accessed files in cases. I had a case recently where a whole bunch of stuff showed up on Reddit. And the first thing I did was go ask for who had access. And it turns out that's where the information came from. So
hop in there, Josh.
Yeah, I just to add to that, when I was in the DA's office as a law clerk, before I even graduated, and I was unpaid. I was assisting attorneys in some very high profile cases, and I had access to all that information. And this was, I'm going to date myself, but long ago, when it was, mainly paper files we're talking about, but I had, I could get into any box with sensitive documents and make copies and walk it out the back door if I were so inclined. So a lot of people, including people with as low pay as no pay, have access to some of this information. But even now, a lot of this discovery is not, we're not in the days of copying everything and putting it in bankers' boxes and wheeling it over to the defense. They put it on the cloud. They just send somebody. The last few cases I've had, the discovery is turned over through a link that's emailed to me. So who then, now that opens up the world of everybody who could have access to that cloud, a hacker or anybody else. It really is.
That's a great point. I'll never forget when I had to cover OJ's release from prison, and it was in like the most remote part of Nevada, I want to say Lovelock, Nevada. And I remember driving out there with my photographer, and you're in the open desert, and you look to your left, and it's just like what looks like warehouse after warehouse after warehouse after warehouse after warehouse. And it literally goes on for like over a mile. And I was like, what is this? And it turned out that is where they store a lot. That is the cloud. The cloud is actually in the Arizona or the Nevada desert. So that's a great point, Josh. I mean, there could be some guy, walking through the aisles of a bazillion computers that are the cloud and be able to access information, or someone sitting in, who knows, Czechoslovakia or somewhere. Who the hell knows? But Fix, coming back to you here. So Judge Hippler did announce a few things. He actually ordered both sides to submit lists. This would scare me. He ordered both sides to submit lists of everyone with access to Kohbergers, to the cell phone records, to the search history, to social media, other digital evidence. And he said in the order, anyone formerly or currently involved with the quadruple homicide case is prohibited from deleting any communications, files, or documents related to Kohberger. I hope whoever did that already. Someone mentioned the Idaho Shield Law. Fix, I don't know what you know about that. Do you know anything? Can you share with us what that is? Because apparently it is not in effect yet. So the person was saying, well, the judge could, I guess, order Dateline's episode removed or so. I don't know. What do we know about that?
I saw that question come over and feared you might come to me.
Yeah.
I might have to defer to our legal friends here with regards to a shield law. What I will say, and that, in my experience, pertains to public record access. That's my personal experience as a journalist. The one with relation to a shield law is that the state in 2022 passed a shield law that protected information about the source of lethal injection drugs for the death penalty, but that's not, I think, relevant in this situation. So yeah, perhaps our friends here are just generally familiar with shield laws. I'm not as much.
This is
go ahead.
Just information I have completely at the top of my head, Joel, but there was a Idaho House Bill 158 was passed on March 27th, and it will be in effect on July 1st. So it's not in effect yet, but that is the new Idaho Shield Law dealing with exactly this issue on whether or not media can be compelled to turn over their sources. Just
by the way, Ritter, I
know from my casual reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, Ritter, a while back, I looked something up that had your name mentioned, and I don't know. Hopefully, I'm not stirring the pot here. Hopefully, you guys get along. But is your brother sort of a genius? Your brother is also an attorney. It sounds like he's a genius from what I was reading. Like, you would actually know this. Is he a genius?
My brother is also an attorney, and I will never admit that he's a genius, but he's a very, very bright man.
Yeah. Is he smarter than you, Josh?
Probably. Yes.
So he would know this law off the top of his head. So Fix, you were out of the loop for a minute. So also Hippler, the judge, he increased the number of alternate jurors from 6 to 8. This is obviously, I guess, because he's concerned about media contamination. is there any precedence for this? I mean, were people surprised that he did this?
A lot of that happened actually during that hearing was kind of confusing. We started 30 minutes late. This was in May, and there was no answer even from the court spokesperson there. Why aren't we being let in? We're under the impression this is a public hearing. And then it was midstream that he mentioned that because of Friday is how he put it. And I, of course, happened to realize that on Friday that Dateline episode had run. So I assume that's what he was referencing. And then later at the tail end of the public portion of the hearing, he said, and as I mentioned this morning, I will be requesting that each side retain all the records. We've gone over that a couple of times. And then he, as I said, he mentioned that he would entertain and essentially invite the defense to file for a special prosecutor. And these are all elements that he's deploying in order to, I think, move forward on time. We will see. And to ensure that they can get a fair and impartial jury best they can.
Yeah. Jen B says, I feel like there's always a 60-minute episode it's their bread and butter. They feature these stories because they know it's going to get numbers for them. And by numbers, I mean ratings. So Sky Lazaro, there's one other facet to what we're discussing tonight that I want to get through, and then we'll get final thoughts, I promise. But we knew some of this, but court records have been filed in this case from, I guess, 2014, going back to 2014, showing then 19-year-old Bryan Kohberger. He was arrested after his own father, Michael Kohberger, reported him to police. He told the police that he had drug abuse issues. This particular incident involved Bryan stealing and selling his sister's iPhone to fuel his drug habit. Now, some of this stuff did leak out previously, but it was just filed recently. He stole the phone and sold it to buy heroin, according to the police report, just a sign of how deep his addiction was. And then they have a friend in this filing, a friend of Kohbergers, or at least a former friend. That is a photo of him, sort of selfie-like from the recent selfies. That is definitely, I believe, Pennsylvania. But one of Bryan Kohberger's former friends is a guy named Rich Pasqua. And he himself recounts his own time with Bryan Kohberger, where he said in 2013, they actually both worked at a local pizza shop in Pennsylvania and, quote unquote, we used heroin together. And he went on to say that he was socially awkward and bullied in high school over his weight. But I'm asking all this stuff, and this is obviously post-weight loss. What does this do for the death penalty aspect of the case? I mean, if you're Ann Taylor, are you now, on top of autism, going to say this guy is a recovering heroin addict? Maybe his brain was impacted. He's not thinking rationally. I don't know what the medical studies say, but if you're the defense attorney, are you going to dig something up to point to a potential problem here?
Yes, and I think that goes more towards the death penalty phase than the guilt phase. Although there can be some interplay if you're looking for planting the seed. But typically speaking, in the criminal phase, you want to keep out any prior bad conduct or criminal conduct. However, this is mitigation when it comes to the death penalty phase. Anything that you can scrape up on your client, and we've seen it be successful in other cases, whether it's, these mitigation experts go back and talk to first grade teachers. They really, really do a deep dive into people's lives to figure out what was going on. If there's a history of autism, if there's a history of drug abuse, does that affect, cognitive development? Will it affect the way he thinks? Not necessarily as a justification to the conduct, but as a reason as to why he should spend the rest of his life in prison instead of be executed for this case.
Yeah. Josh, I guess coupled with that, is it also, I guess, a tactic by the defense to garner sympathy? They know that the public has a voracious appetite for this. They're going to be reading about this. They're going to find out, poor Bryan, he is a heroin addict in recovery, is part of this to garner sympathy and empathy.
You're saying before the trial begins?
Yeah, I'm saying like now people read about it and maybe it'll influence a juror. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, I hope not. I mean, I really feel like it gets into murky waters when either side is trying to actively influence the potential jury pool. But perhaps they feel that there's they need to do a little bit of mitigation, considering how much bad information is out there about their client already.
Yeah. Yeah. Final thing, and then we'll get some final thoughts. The firing squad fix. I mean, this is now, I guess, the new mode of execution. It's not starting, I don't think, for a while. So when is it starting? Is this a possibility for Bryan Kohberger down the road?
Well, that's a fairly significant leap, but were he to be convicted, one, and two, be sentenced to death, and over the course of decades of likely appeals, yes, this is set to be Idaho's lead execution method. The Department of Correction here in the state actually has paused executions for the next 6 to 9 months while they renovate their execution chambers so they can provide for a firing squad. So we've seen 2 firing squad executions in this country this year, 2 in South Carolina, the first time in 15 years in the U.S. And Idaho will become officially on July 1st, 2026, the only U.S. state with a firing squad as its preferred method.
Man.
We have it as an alternative, but you have to elect to have it.
Yeah, I was going to say, Utah's got it too.
So, Sky, if you're in Utah and you're on death row and you're convicted and you get a choice at the end of the day, you can say, kill me by firing squad?
I believe you have to specifically request the firing squad. Otherwise, it's lethal injection.
Wow. Imagine having to make that request. Although some people say, it's quicker and more. They take a square shot to your heart, I think, and you just die instantly. So anyway, that's pretty depressing stuff. Josh Ritter's not. He's always uplifting, even though he's this, maybe not the smartest brother in the family, but he's still smarter than me. That's for damn sure. Josh Ritter, I got to get your brother on the show one day. I hope after this, you're not like, I haven't talked to him in 17 years.
No.
So.
I just hope he wasn't watching this.
Yeah. I'll have to get him on. But Josh Ritter, LA Prosecutor of the Year, current criminal defense attorney, and host of the amazing Courtroom Confidential, of which I was lucky enough to be a guest on last night. So Josh Ritter, does this begin with jury selection? And you're supposed to meet me out there July 31st, or will this be continued into the winter months, Josh, where you and I will have to wear layers upon layers and big, thick winter boots because it's cold in Idaho in February, let's say?
No, I have a feeling that the judge is going to press forward. And that is because any issue that even the stuff that we've talked about tonight about any potential issue created by this recent leak is all kind of speculative potential issues that don't actually truly exist right now. The idea of, hey, we need to find out who this is. We need to get to the bottom of all of this. Well, when is that going to happen? When could that, that could take place, like we said, months or never. So you can't delay this trial just for the potential of trying to find out something. And I think the judge is going to say, listen, leak or no leak, it doesn't affect the admissibility of the evidence that we're talking about in this case. It doesn't affect your ability to prepare for the case as you've been doing all this time. We're heading forward. Yeah, you can investigate. We can have that kind of happening at the same time in the background, but we're heading forward. We're moving forward.
Cindy Hollenbeck, who comes to us from Pullman, formerly of Moscow, Idaho. Special shout out to her. And I might have to borrow your parka if this gets bumped. Sky Lazaro, great person, and a very great defense attorney and a lover of horses. Who does not? How could you not love? By the way, do you watch like the Derby? Do you like horse racing or do you not like horse racing?
I like horse racing.
Yeah. I was curious. I don't know. Maybe because sometimes those horses break their legs, and that's never a good thing. So I didn't know.
I will say this in defense of horse racing: the people I know involved in the sport take very good care of their horses, and freak accidents can happen no matter what you do. cowboys' horses fall down and get hurt, and hunter jumpers fall down and get hurt. And unfortunately, it's always sad, but the people I know in the racing industry, those horses are treated and taken very good care of. In fact, I've got an ex-race horse that I'm retraining as a jumper now that is probably the most spoiled horse I've seen in a minute. So
I need to get you on with Monica Jordan. Her daughter's on the equestrian team at Baylor, and you guys would.
Awesome. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Horses, dogs, humans. Who do you like the most out of those three? And who do you like second most, if you had to rank them? Horses?
That's not nice for me to
All right, Sky.
More horses than dogs. Although I really, really love my dog. So
yeah, I love my dog.
But I like some people too.
People aren't on that list though.
Yeah. Humans are number 3. And my final question, Sky, before your final thoughts, what are those little gold, almost Academy Award, little miniature Oscar looking things behind you on the wall?
They're just like these little figurines. So I used to have one that I moved like 15 times and broke, but like one of them is like the shush face and the blind face and the I can't hear you.
Yeah, I love it. So the big problem here, which is a very big problem, is that there's touch DNA on the knife sheath. Is there a way around that for Bryan Kohberger? And do you agree that this happens in late July, August?
Touch DNA is actually kind of a hot button topic in some ways in terms of talking about DNA, because experts will come in and talk about the transfer of touch DNA. It's different than finding DNA under fingernails or in maybe a sex assault case in certain places where you would expect to find it. And so I think touch DNA has always been a fairly litigated and expert driven topic in a lot of ways, that there's lots of explanations for the transfer of it in some ways too. Now, a knife sheath at a stabbing is not a good fact for the defense, but I can see them, at least being able to put forth some maybe explanation as to how it got there or where it came from. In terms of the trial, I agree with Josh. Unless something extraordinary happens, I think this case goes forward. This judge has really pushed back on any type of continuance for any reason. Now, if this investigation, if he grants the motion for this special prosecutor to investigate and says, we're going to leave the trial date set, and they come up with something that really is going to actually change sort of the posture of this trial, I could see a continuance at that point. But I think absent something like that, I think he's going to resist any effort to move this at this point.
Yeah, there's something in the water, because about 4 or 5 of the cases we were going to cover were all continued going back to like February. Gossip, rumor, and innuendo. Is Sky working on anything we should know about? I think that means any high-profile cases, Sky.
Probably the closest one I have right now, where I represent one of the individuals who went down to the DRC and is alleged to have attempted a violent coup with some others down there. That was about a year ago. We spent the last year trying to get him back. He was,
as in you're talking about the Congo?
He was convicted and sentenced to death in the Congo. We got those sentences commuted.
Okay, that's
we got him back to the United States, and they indicted him.
Yeah, I don't think by the way, I don't think they use firing squad there. They use like a machete, and it's
I don't think it's good.
Yeah, it's probably not. That's never death penalty in the Congo is never something you want to hear someone saying about you, for sure.
Not about your 22-year-old kid.
No, definitely
To
not.
his mom, that's for sure.
He is Idaho's 3-time reporter of the year, the Idaho Statesman, lead reporter, investigative reporter on this story. He has been all over it. Fix, how frustrating is this gag order? Your final thoughts. I'm going to leave it wide open. I always ask you, what's your biggest get, your scoop, but you don't have to share that this time.
The gag order, at least it applies to everybody. And,
Except
as a
Dateline.
result, well, right. But in terms of who should be speaking and where information is available, it does. And maybe we'll find out that maybe this likely special prosecutor will figure out who it was, to be determined. But we obviously have Wednesday's hearing next week, and it's momentous. I hate, and pardon the term, Sky, but I hate beating a dead horse here. But in reality, it does consistently. It's interesting that every hearing is momentous, and I know I keep saying that, but really, I mean, and I've had this conversation with Josh before. It's just everything is so significant, and you're seeing every trick in the book, every element that can happen in a case we've seen, and I don't mind sharing with people that this is the first major case I've ever been on, and I've been on this roller coaster for 2.5 years and learned so much about the criminal justice and judicial system, because you're seeing all these things that you don't typically in other cases. And Wednesday is the next momentous hearing, and the next one after that will be momentous too. And if Judge Hippler either decides to delay the trial or appoint the special prosecutor or allow an alternate perpetrator to be addressed to the jury during trial, I mean, these things are just these major swings that really could dramatically impact the trial and ultimately the verdict.
Yeah. Do we know how long? I know you said there's an open part of this hearing and then a closed door hearing. Do you know how long the open part of the hearing is roughly expected to go?
I don't. And, if the defense pulls out all the stops as we've seen them, and certainly I'm sure the prosecution is prepared to make their own arguments and cite every court case under the sun to prevent it. It could go a while, but they do have a second portion of the day. So maybe by lunchtime we'll be, kicked out, and they'll move on to the other suspect concept. We'll have to see. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the alternate suspect theory. We're going to take that hearing live. We have Donna Adelson, our original case. She's in court for what is expected to be a close to 3-hour hearing tomorrow, and we are praying to the pool gods that we get the proper stream. Shout out to Courtroom Confidential, Josh, and his lovely wife, gifting 5 memberships. So thank you. And appreciate everybody being here. We'll have Donna Adelson live coverage beginning at 9, and then a Diddy update tomorrow. And Phil and Scott will be back in a couple of weeks because Scott now is on the road. So we will get them back on. Love you, America. Love you, Utah. Love you, Los Angeles, where there's some rioting going on. And love you, Idaho, and justice here for these 4. This is what this case is all about. Guests, if you can, stick around 1 second. We'll see you guys tomorrow, 9 a.m., a few minutes before. Tim Jansen and Joe Patuto will be here for live commentary of Donna Sue Adelson. We'll see you then.